Hi, my name is Delaney McClure, and this is my presentation for the Fall 2025 class, Dynamics of Asia. Today I'll be going over Chapter 14 on the eve of the 21st century. Basically, it's like the later 1900s. And I don't have a lot of time today, so I'm just going to be going over the main events in China and Korea. So first off with China, there was the Tiananmen Square situation, and basically in the 1980s, things were getting better agriculturally, and there was a lot of growth in industry and a lot of growth of the quality of life of the people of China, as well as better international relations, especially with Western countries. But as more information of the outside world came in, there were a lot of calls for more freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and intellectual freedoms. And because of this, a lot of people thought that these calls for more freedoms endangered the Communist Party and their beliefs. But others thought that these new freedoms, especially the intellectual freedoms, would aid in modernization, speed things up, make things better. And then with the death of a prominent reformer in April 1989, there were mass protests, and this is what we know as the Tiananmen Square situation. The protests were mainly students calling for democracy as well as calling out a lot of the government corruption that had been happening. The government didn't do anything for weeks while the protests were going on, and students and protesters took over Tiananmen Square, and it was kind of not great timing because there was a Soviet leader, Russian leader who was visiting, and because of that there was a lot of foreign press, so the Tiananmen Square protests and then subsequent violence got a lot of international media attention. Now, the Chinese leader was tolerant of this for a while, for a few weeks, but eventually he got fed up and he was reminded of the traumas he endured during the Cultural Revolution with all of these protests, and against a lot of advice from people around him, he ended up sending troops in, and the numbers aren't exact, but there was hundreds to thousands of protesters who were mainly students killed. And this happened not just in Tiananmen Square, there were also troops sent to other cities around China as well. Those who were not killed or caught, in terms of the leaders of the protests, were jailed and jailed for a really long time. There were a lot of calls from American politicians to release these protesters. But the violence set back international relations. There were a lot less investments and loans, as well as students from China who were studying abroad. They just didn't come back, which kind of makes sense because if you're a student in China and you learn about all of these protests calling for more freedoms by students, where a bunch of students were just killed, you wouldn't necessarily be like rushing on a plane to get back. But the setback in international relations didn't last too long, maybe like a few months, except for in the case of America, where it lasted a bit longer, because other countries just figured China was too big, too powerful, and the money that China was bringing in with their rapid industrialization was too good to just not invest for that long. And so the main takeaway from this event was that it was clear that democracy would not come to China through nonviolent measures. However, the leader of China did not regret sending the troops in. Him and his supporters stood firm in their decision that this was what they had to do. But yeah, the Americans were quite upset about this. A lot of American politicians really stuck to the Tiananmen Square situation and made calls for the protesters to be released, but China wasn't about to let foreigners bully them into changing domestic policy and meddle in their business and in their politics. And in the end, China kind of won this battle, if you will. They didn't give in, and eventually Americans would start investing in China again. Now for Korea. So the English spelling of this president's name is Roh Tae-woo, but the Korean spelling, it says Noteu, so I'm just gonna go with the American spelling because I'm not sure the correct way to like pronounce it. So we're just gonna say Roteu for now. He was kind of a big deal in 1988 because he was the first actually democratically elected leader who wasn't considered a dictator. Before him, all the presidents of Korea were kind of dictatory. A lot of them got into power through military coups and violent means, including his predecessor, Chon Doo-hwan. So Rotae, 1988, first president elected who wasn't like a dictator. And during this time, there was an increase in international relations, especially with communist countries like North Korea, the communist countries in Europe, the Soviet Union, Russia, and China. Except because of the Soviet and Chinese involvement in the Korean War, where they sided and backed up and continued to side and back up North Korea even after the war, things were a bit rocky, but because of the vast industrialization in South Korea, the former allies of the North decided that it was more worth it to invest and be friendly with South Korea than keep their loyalties solely with the North. Something else that was notable in 1988 was the Olympics. The Olympics, because of this, there was a lot of international attention on Korea, and Korea really felt that and wanted to make the most of it. So there was a lot of development in different aspects of daily life. One of the most notable things, this is some information that I remember from when I was in Korea 2 years ago, and I went on a tour, and the tour guide was saying this, was the public restrooms. Once they, sorry, so when the Olympics were happening, people weren't only going there for the Olympics, they were also traveling around Korea a little bit. And so public restrooms in 1988 and before in Korea were not the best. So because of the Olympics, there became a lot more public restrooms and a lot more Western style toilets were seen. It wasn't like the hole in the ground style. It's not straight up just a hole in the ground. If you've ever gone to one of that style of bathroom, you know there's, a little like thing. So the public restrooms became a lot more developed, and if you go to Korea now, there's a lot of public restrooms, a lot of Western style toilets. And also back then, the toilets, the restrooms were not segregated all the time. There was a lot of times where you'd go into a bathroom and it was both for men and women, like multiple stalls for men and women. So after that, the Olympics, the bathroom situation just kind of got upgraded. Anyways, so just like most presidents in Korea have either, almost all, have either been jailed, put in prison, or assassinated. And Rotae was no different. So Rotae was real buddy-buddy with his predecessor, the former president Chon Doo-hwan, who got into power due to a military coup in 1979. And so in 1996, both Rotae and Chon Doo-hwan were jailed for the coup and for the 1980 Gwangju massacre. But also because there was like a lot of corruption discovered with the chaebols, the big conglomerates, the like rich families, and they were put in prison for 17 years. Not really, that was just the sentence. It's a big trend in Korea, in like Korean politics with the presidents. Whenever one is jailed, the next president will just pardon them, and so that's what happened here. So he was only in jail for like a year-ish. And yeah, he was pardoned by the next president, so the jail sentence didn't really mean too much. But in 1997, there was the IMF crisis, and this was a big blow to Korea. It was a huge deal. A lot of the companies in Korea just collapsed. They disappeared. The ones dealing with the chaebols and a lot of other small businesses and whatnot also were hit really hard during this time. And the won, the Korean currency, lost its value majorly. If you've seen the show or if you watch it, When Life Gives You Tangerines, it's very popular. It's on Netflix, I believe, with the actress and singer IU. She's very popular. You might know her. Anyways, there's I think an entire episode or two towards the end where it kind of goes over the IMF crisis. It shows one of the main characters, played by IU, she loses her job. I don't know if her company completely goes under, but I know she for sure loses her job, and it shows a bunch of other people and businesses who, a bunch of other people who lose their jobs, a lot of businesses that just disappear, they go under, and things were really bad during this time financially, kind of for like the whole of Korea. There was also, again, from the tour that I took 2 years ago, this is what I remember, a lot of Korean people just donate. I don't know if it was donations, but anyways, they were giving away the gold that they owned to the government to try to help Korea dig itself out of the hole that they were in, which was called the IMF crisis. Eventually, things got better, but it did take a little bit of time. And also during this time, a lot of people started to rethink unification because the North and the South, for quite a few decades after the Korean War, it wasn't quite, no one was sure which one was gonna be the winner. But at this time, they realized South Korea was doing much better economically, and people saw what happened with East and West Germany and how costly it was to reunify. So a lot of people rethought unification, and even today, people are like, a lot of Korean people are kind of iffy on Korean unification because of how much it would cost the South, how big of a blow it would be economically to the South to have to take over, not take over, have to, take over the debts of the North kind of thing. And anyways, and also in 1997, President Kim Dae-jung was elected. Now, North Korea was abandoned by the Soviet Union as it fell in 1991, and South Korea became much more profitable. During this time, there was a lot of competition between the North and the South. The North did many things to try to keep up with the South. Again, from the tour I took 2 years ago, just a quick little tidbit. I'm pretty sure that North Korea, I don't know if South Korea did it as much, but I know that North Korea got a lot of alliances with different African countries just so that they had a lot more allies and international relations. But again, in 1988, there was the Olympics in Seoul, and the North was not very happy about this, and they tried to go like 50-50 on it. They were like, we're split in half. If they get it, we should get it too. We should at least get half. That didn't work. That didn't hold up. They were not doing as well financially, infrastructurally, industrially. They were not necessarily up to par to have the Olympics, and South Korea ended up having the entire Olympics. North Korea did not go halvesies for that one. But during this time, there was a lot of terrorist attacks, a lot of planes being hijacked and assassination attempts, and there was a lot of fear in the South that this would impact the Olympics. They were kind of thinking that the North would try to do some type of terrorist attack like during the Olympics to, because there would be a lot of international attention there. And anyways, so that was a big part of the politics during the time. My sources that I used were from memory, from the tour and my experiences in South Korea, and from talking to people and going on tours, historical tours, and the book East Asia at the Center, Chapter 14. Thank you.